everyone, and welcome back to Unedited Chatter with Stephanie and Tisha. Thank you for joining us today.
Unedited Chatter drops new episodes every other Wednesday. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. The socials listed are listed in the show notes. This show is an independent production. The views expressed here are our own and not those of our professional roles or employers. This is our Unedited Chatter. Let's get to it. We are so excited to have our friend Alexander Kopelman here. He is a writer, a social entrepreneur, an advocate, and a coach who has devoted 40 plus years to advancing social justice and personal empowerment. His lifelong interest in identity, self-determination, and the power of narrative has really fueled his commitment to supporting our young people and overcoming limiting effects of outmodeled societal stereotypes on individual development. He is the founding president and CEO of Children's Art Guild, and he helped create and grow a nonprofit organization that supports children in exploring and developing their authentic selves, something that is so crucial in our society today in really truly learning more about our youngest authentic learners. Welcome, Alexander.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, we are super excited to have you here. I love your title, which is Helping Children Remain Their Authentic Selves in a Limiting World. I love that because we have had so many people on here lately talking about how this is becoming more difficult all the time. I'm actually writing a children's book right now on this, knowing who you are, knowing your worth, making sure that your mark is left on the world and finding out what that mark is. So why are you here to talk about that? Why is this important to you?
You know, for me, this journey started when I came to the United States as a 13-year-old from the Soviet Union. I didn't know any English. Suddenly encountered the process of discovering who you are in a different language. And that really left a profound mark on the way I think about identity and the degree to which it's a self-created construct. And so I've always been interested in how we go about developing those identities and the influences that our environments have on them. Again, coming from a very restrictive society, I was really excited by the idea of the freedom that exists in a culture like the United States. And over the years, I've also discovered the ways in which that freedom is mitigated by the kinds of messages we receive as people really from birth on. And so that's been a lifelong fascination for me. When we started the Children's Arts Guild, we're really focusing on the way that societal messages limit the way that young boys conceive of who they are. We knew from the beginning that we would want to expand that to boys and girls, and that's how our programs grew and eventually evolved to working with teachers in order to reach larger numbers of children, really. And that's where all the ideas for Real, the book that's coming out on June 9th, really come from, was largely those experiences with the children themselves and then with educators. And then there's been a whole lot of research that I've done in the process.
So 13, having to navigate a new place, having to navigate a new communication system, having to navigate creating this identity. And then years later, fast forward, now we're creating this space for children to feel comfortable to build, regardless of what external variables they have against them. Talk to us a little bit about how you do that with arts integration.
Well, with the way that we think about art is in the larger, older sense of the word art, where we really think of living as a human being as an art form. The story I always tell is that we go into classrooms to do workshops, professional development workshops with educators. And sometimes we'll ask, how many people consider themselves creative? And usually only one or two hands go up. And to me, that's really difficult to fathom because I don't understand how any teacher gets through a day without all the creativity that requires, right? And really any of us get through any day without creativity. But that's one of the aspects of us that is socialized out of children fairly early, this idea that we're all creative in our different ways. Because what's happened with the arts is that it's become professionalized. So unless I'm really good at drawing and I'm channeled to pursue visual art, or if I'm pretty good at singing or playing an instrument and I'm going to be channeled in that direction, dabbling is not really accepted anymore. And with that, we start to cut away from the creative parts of ourselves. You layer on that the pressure on children to specialize in terms of what they're going to be. I think one of the the worst things that we do to kids is to ask them, what are you going to be when you grow up? And we start doing that when they're really tiny, right? So we want 8-year olds to be really good at being 8-year olds. We don't want them thinking about being 21-year olds. But that's what we do as a society. And that's part of what we're trying to encourage adults to step back from and to say, it's okay for the kids to just be kids because they will arrive where they need to be. We just need to continue to build those scaffolds and move them at the appropriate moment and be there for them. So that's really part of how we think about it. To answer your question more directly, so everything we do starts with a hands-on activity. It might involve visual art, it might involve writing, anything that gets people out of their thinking brains into the rest of their beings to experience what we're talking about. And then once that happens, and especially, part of the goal is to help people connect with what childhood was like for them. And once we have that connection, we then begin to put in place a structure of research and of kind of framing it into something that's actionable. And so that's the methodology. But it's always the creative component that takes us back to who we are.
One of the things that I loved that I read, it says helping children see themselves as the authors of their own life stories. I love that. I think as teachers and even as parents, that's something that we can support and we should be pushing instead of what do you want to be? But that is just something we ask. Even as early childhood teachers, we say, what are you going to be when you grow up? And we have them hold a picture or whatever it is, right? But when I think back to that, let them be the author of their own life story. That is so cool to think about. Like, this is what we need to be doing, right?
So I have a funny story, sweet funny story. I just did an activity with the teachers at a middle school in Williamsburg where I've been doing a year-long program. And one of the questions that we addressed was, what did you want to be when you were a child? Were you thinking about growing up? And one of the teachers said, I wanted to be a mermaid. And that's a wonderful answer to that question, right? To connect it to what you were saying, I think the next question is, what would it take for you to be a mermaid, right? Because you want to engage that child's imagination. She's already there, right? So to help her just run with it, that's, I think, the part that we've forgotten. And I agree with you that we need to just bring back to the kids and to parents and to grandparents and to teachers, let the kids be as imaginative as possible with the stories they're telling. They'll get to being engineers and chemists and whatever else in due time, but we don't want to socialize the mermaids out of them. The other piece to this is that there's also some really interesting research about supporting children and being the main characters in their stories, because sometimes the way that we write our stories is that we are not the um, the agents who move the plot along. And that's one of the things to look for. And I think, especially for educators and parents, is the child kind of stepping back and feeling that life is pushing her along, as opposed to that she is creating the life that is meant to be happening.
I love that.
That would be a shift of where we are for sure. And I'm excited about that shift because then we give that again, that very authentic element back to who should be the author of the story, the children or the young adult or the young, whatever it might be. Speaking of authorship, you have a new book that is out. Tell us about it.
It's not out yet. It's coming out on June 9th. So that's for real, helping children. Whoops, I'm getting the title wrong. Helping children remain their authentic selves in a limiting world. And really, what it does is it takes the 15 years of our experience and research and creates a very practical program for people to follow. It's for adults. We primarily see educators, parents, and other caregivers and healthcare professionals as our key audience, as the people who really have a tremendous impact on children's lives. And it takes, just as I was describing, every chapter opens with an activity that the reader is invited to do. And then process, and then it gives a theoretical, for lack of a better word, but a foundation of how to think about what we just experienced. And then every chapter concludes with a recommendation for how to do these kinds of activities with children.
And all of that will be in our show notes. So I just want everybody to know you can go and on all of the socials and find where you can get the book and things like that. As we wrap up, what is one thing that you want our listeners who are parents, teachers, administrators, and maybe just people listening that enjoy working with children? What do you want them to know or what do you want them to leave with?
This is hard work, and the work has to start with us. I think that very often as adults, we want to skip over and do things for the children, and we leave ourselves behind. This kind of work is absolutely rooted in the idea that you have to model what it means to be authentic. You can't talk to kids about being the authors of their own story if you're not showing them that you're also doing that in your own life. And that's the process that we take readers through in the book, and that's what our workshops are all about. So, but my hope is that people embrace that idea with enthusiasm and with empathy for how difficult it can be, and that it's really essential for creating the kinds of changes that we're talking about. We can be the generation that breaks some of the cycles that we believe are harming our children.
It seems to be a common theme, doesn't it, Steph?
Yes.
I think things might be shifting, and I love people's mindsets. So, Alex, thank you so much for being here today. I love this. I can't wait to check your book out. It'll be in the show notes, and we're excited to let everybody know about that. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity and the conversation.